I'm Jeb Butler, and this is Attorney Brittany Partridge. We wanted to talk about a case that we recently resolved. It was a pedestrian accident that we resolved for a policy limit of $3 million. I'll do some basic facts, and then Brittany can talk about injuries in a little more detail. But it was a pretty simple case. Our client, Miss Wheeler, whose name has been changed for privacy purposes, was walking across the street in the crosswalk. I mean, doing what she's supposed to do when somebody driving an equipment rental truck, Sunbelt Rentals, took a left turn and just hit her, knocked her down, and caused some pretty serious problems.
Yes, so she was hit by an F-250, and as you can imagine, that would cause some pretty severe injuries. She suffered multiple orthopedic injuries. Her shoulder was deformed on scene, same with her elbow. She was bleeding from her head, her leg. Ultimately, she was diagnosed with multiple broken ribs, 2 wrist fractures, a collarbone fracture, a scalp hematoma, so that big bump to the head, and multiple cuts and bruises. So she had to undergo 2 surgeries at the hospital after she was transported by ambulance, and one was to do fixation on her elbow, and then also to have a arthrotomy on her knee to ensure that they got out all of the injured tissue and to keep her safe. She was in the hospital for approximately a month, did develop some infections, so she wound up back in the hospital, had to undergo another surgery, just very extensive injuries with medical bills totaling over $700,000.
And she was an older person, too.
She was 78 years old at the time of the wreck.
So we have, you can see behind us there, we have a video. This is from the officer's body camera footage. That's the little camera that the officer sometimes wears on their vest. And we'll see if it'll play. We'll just play a little clip. In this clip, you'll see the officer approaches to and starts talking with the at-fault driver, the driver of the truck, who's there in a black shirt with some kind of hat on. We've dealt with cases where it wasn't clear who was at fault, where you have to fight about that. Here, I mean, this guy took a left and hit a pedestrian who was walking with the signal, with the walk signal, in a crosswalk. But he perhaps didn't make the greatest impression. We'll hit play.
Not too good. I bumped her.
So you can see Miss Wheeler there in the background. She's in a stretcher. We won't show anything graphic, but later you can see some blood pooling on her leg. I mean, not a happy scene. And then you have this guy who's claiming he had the right of way, which is wrong, and kind of smirking as he talks about it. We didn't think that would create a very good impression with the jury. One unusual fact in this case is that our client, Ms. Wheeler, passed away during the pendency of the case. And wasn't necessarily, she didn't die just because of the collision. I guess we'll talk about that more later. But one of the things that Brittany suggested we talk about is what happens when your client passes away during the pendency of the case. And the answer is that the claim that your client had, Ms. Wheeler's claim against Sunbelt Rentals, passes to her estate, which is this sort of legal entity or the legal organization, I guess, that's set up to handle a person's property, including their legal claims after they die. So then the administrator of the estate takes over. And we work then not for our client because our client has passed away, but for the administrator of the estate. Here that ended up being our client's son, because Ms. Wheeler died without a will and her son was appointed the administrator. Here the case settled fairly early, but it would have been litigation against Sunbelt Rentals. Why is that?
So in this case, as you could see in that body camera footage, our at-fault driver was wearing in uniform. He's got his polo with Sunbelt Rentals. He's got a hat on, I believe it says Sunbelt Rentals, operating an F-250 that was owned by Sunbelt Rentals. And in Georgia, we have this concept, and probably throughout the country, called respondent superior. And basically, it means that you are, as an employer, responsible for your employees' negligence while they're in the course and scope of their duty. And here in this case, our at-fault driver was driving to a job for his work, so he was in the course and scope of his job, and therefore Sunbelt Rentals is going to be responsible for his negligence.
And that matters a lot here because Sunbelt Rentals carried a sizable insurance policy, as we've already alluded to. There's some challenges here. One is that 10 months after the collision, our client passed away, and we had hoped that we could argue that her passing away was as a result of this collision, that she got knocked down and she was older and it set her on her downward path, and that's what killed her. But the facts just didn't really support that, as it turned out. She had some other things going on. One of them was untreated bladder cancer. And we consulted with a couple pathologists, sometimes known as medical examiners, who are doctors who specialize in determining the cause of death for forensic purposes, that is, for litigation. And neither of them could tell us that the collision caused her death. So we did not have a wrongful death case. Instead, we had a period of pain and suffering that ended at 10 months because that's all she lived after the collision. So that presented a couple challenges. One is that it's a finite period, and we expected the defense to argue that, okay, this was bad, it's true, but it's not a lifelong injury. It was only 10 months. And also, we think the defense would have argued that given the other medical conditions that our client had, including but not limited to bladder cancer, her quality of life was going to be low anyway. So they would have argued the wreck didn't change all that much. So we were a little bit concerned about those defenses in terms of preventing us from getting a really good verdict. But we still believed in the case, and Brittany can tell us about that and what we did next.
Yes, so we thought, especially given she only had 10 minutes to live after this wreck, that those 10 months really mattered. 10 months, yes, sorry. 10 months after the wreck. So it was important to us to put value on those 10 months since they were her last ones. And there was a $3 million insurance policy on the truck, and that insured the driver through Sunbelt. And we demanded the full amount under what's known as a 67.1 demand. So it's a statute in Georgia that we are required to send demands under if it is a pre-suit car wreck case. So we did send a demand pursuant to that statute, and after 22 days, the insurance company accepted our demand and paid the $3 million policy to our client.
I meant to show earlier the police report just gives a basic illustration of the collision. You can see there vehicle one is obviously the Sunbelt rental truck, and it is hitting our pedestrian in the crosswalk, just like we talked about. And as Brittany said, I mean, yes, her last 10 months on Earth probably wouldn't have been ideal, but it's all she had. And it was essentially ruined for her by Sunbelt. So we felt like it was a good case, and obviously the insurance company was worried enough to pay $3 million. So, nothing can ever bring back Miss Wheeler. But it was able to bring some closure to the family. Our client was happy with the settlement. Now everybody can move on as best they can.